And we're live for the Muscle Growth, How to Optimize Muscle Growth podcast.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Episode 3.
Yeah. We should probably say the name of the podcast.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome to Lowering the Barrier, the podcast. I'm Alex.
And I'm Maddie.
And intros aren't our strong suit, I guess.
No. I think we skipped an intro.
Did we?
Altogether. Like, we didn't introduce the podcast name last time.
Number 2?
Yeah.
Whoops. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's just nice to get right into it. If you stuck
Yeah.
around for the conclusion of our last one, the conclusion was horrible. We just... Well, I edited it, so It was like I went through it a few times, and I was like, how can I make this better?
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time prepping for the content of this.
I don't really write it.
You do a lot of prep for this.
Yeah, what prep have you done?
I read Alex's prep.
I have prepped for this one like...
hours upon hours.
8 to 12 hours, probably. Maybe. Yeah. And that's not including like the years I've spent trying to understand this topic. And I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable about this topic, but I just want to pull specific studies. Do you want to talk about our upcoming vacation or anything like that?
Yeah, I would love to talk about vacation.
Yeah, so we're going to the Grand Caymans. Very exciting.
Yeah, we've never been.
Yep.
So we have nothing planned for it.
We have nothing planned.
Yeah.
Apparently they have the bioluminescent algae there.
Yeah.
Which is, if you're unfamiliar, it's where you are in the water, like in the ocean, I think is where it typically happens. I don't know if it's like ponds or lakes, but...
I'm not really sure.
I don't know. But anyways,
the specifics.
And there's this algae that when you move through it or run your hands through it or anything like that, it like lights up. Mm-hmm. And so it's very... You go at night and it's very dark and... the water lights up. It looks like a scene out of Avatar, like the blue people Avatar, not the Last Airbender.
Yes. Yeah.
Very different.
Yeah.
So yeah, really excited. We're going when there's a full moon, right?
Yes. Yeah. So one thing that's so interesting about this bioluminescent bay is they do these guided tours, both on boats and kayaks and all sorts of things. And I was looking into it and I was really excited, but they don't operate during a full moon.
Yeah.
And of course, we just so happen to be going during the 1 week period where they don't operate.
Right.
These guided tours. We can still go.
Hypothetically, I mean, where?
We would just go to the bay. So there's like guided tours that like take off from like a certain area. I don't know the specifics, to be honest, but.
Okay. All right. Well, cool. Yeah, I'm really excited for that too. Anything else that we want to talk about before we dive in?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So the goal of this podcast is lowering the barrier, and that means making it easier and all of this more accessible to you.
Right.
Now, in sharp contrast, this is the opposite of this podcast. This specific episode. This specific episode is optimizing muscle growth. And really, we're going to kind of touch on a lot of points that maximize muscle growth, which means that in a lot of ways, you have to go the extra mile. And so we'll kind of talk about what's practical versus what's optimal.
Right. But also, we're like lowering the barrier to know how to do that. Even if you're
fair.
Like striving for maximum muscle growth, that's still a hard thing to navigate.
This is decades of knowledge condensed into a 1 to 2 hour episode.
And I'm here.
By decades of knowledge, I meant like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants and getting other people's, studies and things like that, learning from the top minds in the field with their research. So anyway, had a lot of fun diving into this. Muscle growth is one of my most enjoyable topics, in terms of fitness and nutrition. It's like, okay, what do we have? We have muscle growth and we have fat loss, and that's kind of it. But then you dive a little bit deeper, and there's, for sport or for health, longevity, it's for aesthetics, it's the nutrition. There's so much that you can dive into nutrition. So, but muscle growth is still, while a wide topic, sort of, it is very important to me, and it's something I just enjoy reading about. Now, if you hear me talk about muscle hypertrophy is a word that, one, is tough to say if you haven't said it a lot of times.
It is. I always stumble over it.
Yeah. When I first started reading about it back in 2012, 2013, it was like hypertrophy. Yeah. And I couldn't get hypertrophy. So anyways, hypertrophy just means increased size. So when we say muscle hypertrophy, we mean increasing the muscle size. And that is different than muscle strength, but we might cover that on another episode. Or actually, I think somebody asked about it. Yeah, in the Q&A. So For listeners, here's kind of the breakdown. We're going to go into why muscle matters. We're going to go very deep into diet with both your recommended calories, protein, carbs, and fats. We're going to talk about volume, set volume specifically versus intensity. We're going to talk about sleep. We're going to talk about how stress impacts muscle growth. And honestly, this was one of the most interesting studies I've ever read. And it was also hilarious, and we'll get into why. We'll talk about exercise selection and what makes a great hypertrophy or muscle growth exercise. We'll talk about, does cardio interfere with gains? How long to stick with the same exercise or program, rest times, best rep ranges, supplements. And then we had a lot of questions from our Instagram.
Yeah, thank you guys for submitting questions.
Yeah, that was phenomenal.
Well.
All right. If you'd like to support the podcast for free, please follow myself at Alex Teamy Fitness or Maddie at
Meals with Maddie.
Yep, Meals with Maddie, and that's MATTI. Or join the A Team. The A Team, as of the time this podcast will be posted, will be going through Intro Week. Now, the A Team is my group training program. It is $27 a month, so less than $1 a day. Comes with a 7-day free trial. And I update the program every 6 weeks. First week, Intro Week, is always the best time to join because intensity is a little bit lower, kind of gets you acclimated to the exercise. I answer a whole lot of questions. I'm looking at form videos. And while I do that throughout every single week,
Right.
Intro Week I just find to be the best time to join for new people. Okay, let's get started. So, why does muscle matter? Now, majorly, it makes you look awesome. And
Yeah.
that's subjective, I guess.
Sure.
But I think most people agree that seeing an absolute physical specimen is like, wow, that is impressive. You know, you look at some of the biggest bodybuilders and, you know, there will always be degrees of how cool you think that is, ranging from that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I wish I could do that, but don't want to harm my longevity with copious amounts of steroids. Plus, I don't have the budget for that many steroids. All the way down to, that's disgusting. I can't believe people want to get that big.
Yeah,
and I fall toward the former.
You certainly do. Yeah.
I just think it's, you know, because I know how hard it is to gain appreciable amounts of muscle. Somebody, you know, how often have, maybe not you, but how often have the listeners heard, especially if you're a coach, a woman say, oh, I don't want to lift heavy. You know, I don't want to get big and bulky. And it's
right.
Dude, I've been trying to get big and bulky for a decade.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to get there.
Yeah. I mean, I am by no means the like pinnacle of weightlifting, but like I've been working out with you somewhat consistently for like 6 years.
Yeah.
You know, I go through peaks where it's like 3-4 times a week and then valleys of once a week.
But even still, you've been doing it consistently
For about 6 years.
Yep.
And I am certainly
You're
not
jacked.
bulky.
You're not jacked.
No.
All right. Well, besides the aesthetic portion of muscle growth, which I think everybody knows about,
Sure.
It's also really important for health. You know, and the easiest way to think about health is, or in how muscle growth impacts your health is age-related sarcopenia. Are you familiar with that term, sarcopenia?
Like kind of.
I've mentioned it before.
Yeah.
So it's just age-related muscle loss, and we don't want that. For a variety of reasons, muscle growth is very, very conducive for our health. It helps with blood sugar management. It helps with, you know, if you're elderly and you stumble and you start to fall, if you can catch yourself with your hand or a leg, you might not break that hip. And we all know that if you're elderly and you break a bone, fatality rate skyrockets. So you don't want to lose muscle. But a 2022 meta-analysis by Shalandra and colleagues found that compared with no resistance training, doing any resistance training reduces all-cause mortality risk by 15%, cardiovascular disease mortality by 19%, and cancer mortality by 14%. A maximum risk reduction of 27% was observed at just around 60 minutes of resistance training per week. And I think that people should marinate on that for a second. Mm-hmm. All I need to maximize my risk of all-cause mortality is 60 minutes per week. Mm-hmm. I could do that 4 times a week, 15 minutes, 20 minutes per day for 3 days per week, you know, do some full body workouts. And we're going to touch on this a little bit later in the podcast, but one of the episodes that we have planned is talking about what's the least you can do for muscle growth and gains. And that is such an important topic that we wanted to make it its own podcast episode, because I think a lot of people are so, it's like, well, they don't know how little they can do and still see gains. So they think, what's the
Right.
point? If
Right.
I can't give enough to, if I, maybe they see me or they see other people, maybe they have a friend who's just in love with going to the gym and they're kind of
Right.
like nutty about it.
Mhm.
Like I would say I'm borderline nutty about it.
Definitely.
I'm going 4 or 5. I usually don't go 6 times a week, but
Yeah.
4 or 5 times a week is very normal for me. And that's been normal for me for the last 8 or 9 years or so. And, you know, with that, I think people might see me and think like, oh, that's what I have to do to gain muscle. No, it's just that I'm at a point where it is harder for me to gain muscle because I've been doing it for so long. I've put on a decent bit and I'm not like huge by any means, but it does just get a little bit harder and a little bit more time consuming. But if you're somebody who's just recreationally trying to either get a little bit, I told our buddy Cullen, I told him that in order for him to get to look like me, it wouldn't take realistically that long. Now, it wouldn't take 6 months, wouldn't take
Sure.
1 year. It might take 3, 4 years, but it's not like this decade long pursuit because you're talking about diminishing returns. You're going to get so much gains in the first 6 to 12 months of lifting. You're just going to get stronger. Your muscle size is just going to explode. So, and then after that, you don't need much to continue the gains. It's just that it does slow down. And, you're talking on, there are diminishing returns. Anyways, I don't want to
Right.
beat that to death
All of
because
that to say, all of that to say is you can see huge benefits with significantly less than you think. Like
yeah,
the gym does not have to be all or nothing.
right.
Like there are huge benefits both aesthetically and for your health
hmm
that don't require hours upon hours in the gym.
Yeah, and this is also kind of a side note, but a lot of people think that if I start lifting weights, then I will lose range of motion. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because I don't want to get like too, locked up or, things like that. That couldn't be further from the truth. When we are doing a static stretch, and maybe this should be its own episode or its own topic, but when we're doing something like a static stretch, what are we doing? We are holding a position with a light amount of load. And I say light amount of load because we're just kind of pulling ourselves like toward our feet, for example, for stretching the hamstrings. But with something like a stiff leg deadlift, what are we doing? We are pushing ourselves toward our toes, but we have a weight in our hands. And so we're doing that stretch still, except we get the added benefits of, hypertrophy and strength. So anyway, all that to be said, there are just a large host of benefits to gaining muscle and to lifting that you should be taking advantage of.
Yeah, just to jump in really quick, we talked on these like all-cause mortality risks and, working out to kind of lower those. And we've talked about aesthetics, but there's also just like day to day, having a little bit more muscle can just make life easier.
For sure.
You had a client once who said something that I thought was an incredible goal. And it was just, she wants the last time she picks up her toddler or daughter to be on her terms, not because she physically can't do it.
That was the sweetest thing I've ever heard.
That is one of the greatest goals I've ever heard. And that is such a like real thing.
Yeah.
Like there are a lot of real life applications, we've mentioned before, like being able to lift your suitcase overhead into the overhead bins. Like those are things that working out makes easier.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, let's start with getting into the episode in terms of optimizing muscle growth. So first we have diet, and this is probably going to be the largest section in my opinion. So when we talk about a diet, we have to look at it from a few different points. And one of the points is your energy intake, so your calories. The other points are your macronutrients. So macronutrients are nutrients that you consume in a very large supply, macronutrient. And so those are typically considered protein, carbs, fats. Technically ethanol or alcohol is one, and technically water is one too, but we don't really
actually didn't know water was considered one.
Yeah, we don't really count those. Okay. So let's start with calories. So calories, when we're talking about an energy, intake, we have 3 options, and it's going to be on a very large range, but we have 3 options. We have surplus, maintenance, or deficit. Deficit, you're eating less than you burn every day. Maintenance, you're eating roughly the same amount as you burn every day. And surplus, you eat slightly more than you burn every day. The short version, for people who just want to skim through this episode, surplus will accelerate muscle growth the most. Maintenance, it gets a bit slower. Deficit, it gets even slower and potentially not at all, or even loss, depending on a large variety of factors. But the severity of a deficit will play a pretty big part in that. You should be looking at calorie intake as a spectrum. So don't think about it as like, if I'm in a deficit, I won't gain muscle. If I'm in a surplus, I will gain muscle. There's a lot of gray area here. So a small calorie surplus will maximize muscle growth. And then the further you get into a large deficit, you'll see diminishing and, like I said, even potentially negative muscle growth. Anyway, let's start with a deficit. We're going to talk about what happens at a deficit and then a surplus, and then we'll kind of talk about the middle. So with a deficit, a 2021 study from Murphy and colleagues found a 500 calorie deficit completely blunted lean mass gains. The same study found a 200 to 300 calorie deficit. People were able to see lean mass gains. However, it's really important to note that studies are on averages. So just because those people saw a 500 calorie deficit doesn't mean that on average people didn't see lean mass gains. It doesn't mean that you, listener, won't see that happen.
Right.
If you're new to training, you have excess body fat. If you're returning from training after a long break, or you just have ridiculous genetics, and you probably would know if you do, you will likely be able to gain very appreciable amounts of muscle at a 500 calorie deficit or beyond. I've had clients who are in a 500, 600, 700, potentially even 1,000 calorie deficit, but they were overweight and they had excess body fat. And as we were coming down in deficit, you could tell that they were getting, first, their lifts just were going up, not just week 1, 2, 3, 4, but weeks 25, 26, 27. They are still getting stronger week to week. You can see their muscle is getting bigger as they're shrinking down. So it's very important to note that like this 500 calorie deficit, that is not a rule. That is an average kind of thing. And that's how all studies work, is we're collecting data to look at averages. And then we need to kind of use a little bit of anecdotal evidence in addition to the data that we get from studies.
Right. But this can also be a great way to kind of like level set expectations a little bit too, of like, if you are in this 500 calorie deficit and all of a sudden training is getting really tough and you're not really seeing progress anymore, maybe that's a sign of like, okay, I need to scale it back a little bit. I'm going too aggressive.
Yeah. And you also have to weigh out your goals. Does somebody care more about, I always ask this, somebody might ask me, should I cut or should I bulk, or how big of a deficit should I be in? Let's put aside the bulk or cut question, but how big of a deficit should I be in? And I always ask people, what's more important to you, maximum fat loss or maximum muscle gain? And let's say we're working within the spectrum of fat loss still. If they are like, well, I want to retain or gain muscle, okay, let's be a little bit more conservative with the deficit. But if they're like, no, I want to maximize fat loss as much as possible, then let's look at the upper limit of how big of a deficit we can go into. And remember, there is an upper limit to which point you are going to be potentially sacrificing lean mass or muscle in exchange for a faster rate of weight loss. And so you have to consider like, maybe going faster isn't the right move right now.
Yeah.
And we can use like formulas and stuff like that. A pretty good formula is taking your estimated body fat percentage, dividing that by 20. And that's like a pretty good percentage of body weight per week to shoot for. Let's say I was 20% body fat, divide that by 20, 1% body weight per week is what I'd be aiming for. If I weighed 160 pounds, I was 20% body fat. That's called skinny fat, by the way. But then I'd be shooting for about 1.6 pounds per week, which that'd be hard. That'd be like very roughly, it'd be like an 800 calorie deficit per week or per day. That
would be tough.
That'd be tough.
Yeah.
Okay. So we covered a deficit. Now let's talk about a surplus. So there was a 2019 study by Slater and colleagues called, quote, "Is an energy surplus required to maximize skeletal muscle hypertrophy associated with resistance training?" Which is shockingly convenient for this section.
Very spot on.
Yeah, that couldn't be better. And it is open access, so if you're curious, you can read through it. So that study, the researchers recommended a conservative surplus of about 350 to 500 calories per day. And I thought it was interesting that they said that was conservative. Now, I've read
Yeah.
other studies that say 700, 800, even up to 1,000 calories surplus per day. And I strongly recommend against this. Strongly recommend against this.
I mean, even without getting into the weeds of like the science of it, you can kind of logic through if you're eating an extra 1,000 calories a day.
That's going to be a lot of body fat.
That's a lot of extra calories over a week.
Yeah.
And of course, your energy expenditure will increase, and it's not like a 1-to-1. But that's
a lot.
That's a pretty big surplus.
It's actually interesting that you mentioned that your energy expenditure will increase. So metabolic adaptation, that's a future episode we have planned, and I'm going to talk about it in just a moment. So you may think a 350 to 500 calorie surplus is the same as 350 to 500 calories above maintenance. It sounds the exact same. It is not. And the reason for that is when you decrease calories, your energy expenditure moves downward as an adaptation. So for example, right now I'm in a fat loss phase. And so my calories, I'm eating like, 22 or 2,300 per day, something like that. And my energy expenditure, I use Macrofactor, use code Alex for 14th day free trial. My energy expenditure has come down as a consequence for that. And the same works in reverse. If you increase your calories, your energy expenditure will increase. And this is largely through NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. I think we did a lot on this on episode 1.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
And we'll talk about metabolic adaptation in depth in a future episode. But just know that if you decrease your calories, your energy expenditure will likely come down. And if you increase, your energy expenditure will likely go up. So if you were to increase 350 to 500 calories above your maintenance, that surplus ends up being quite a bit smaller. Now I'm going to talk about another study, maybe 2. Yeah. 2 studies support going slower when it goes to a surplus. A 2013 study by Garth and colleagues, which looked at elite Norwegian athletes, and they were Norwegian athletes that competed in a multitude of different sports, but they were all bound for the Olympic Games, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So pretty interesting. So legitimately elite Norwegian athletes. Yeah. It's very important to note that
it is very high level
athletes. They found a faster surplus didn't increase muscle growth, but it did increase fat mass gain by 5 times. Now, it was an 8 to 12 week study, and the difference here is 0.44 pounds versus 2.4 pounds of fat mass over those 8 to 12 weeks. So it's not anything like insane, but it is,
it's kind of telling.
It is kind of telling.
Yeah.
Again, it's just showing, it's more evidence that like you probably don't need to go faster. Now, again, it's kind of like, what are your goals?
Right.
Do you not care about body fat? You're like, no, I just want to put on as much lean mass as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Then, dude, send it.
Right.
But the reality is most people, they don't want to put on 10, 20, 30, 40 pounds of body fat, at any rate. Like they would rather have the distribution of muscle versus body fat not skew 90-10 in terms of body fat.
Right. Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, we want to be like, the subjectively aesthetic look is like a good amount of muscle and not too much body fat. So you can still see some like, visible muscle.
Sure.
And obviously it's not everybody's goals, but for the people if that is your goal, dude, just take it slower.
And it also depends on like, if you want really fast, like you want to be in this huge surplus, like, are you okay of having to do the longer cut afterwards to like reveal it? If that's your goal. Again, not everyone cares about revealing it in a cut or like getting leaner afterwards. But that is the other side. If you're putting in significantly more body fat in order to go faster, the other side of that is potentially more aggressive or longer duration of a cut.
Well, yeah, and you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. If you put on this body fat, if you go so fast that you're putting on this body fat and then you have to do a cut, okay, well now we're entering a catabolic state in a cut where it's going to be way harder to put on muscle growth. So we're kind of like, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot by spending less time in a small surplus. We decided to just send it. Now we're not able to be in a surplus anymore if like if our goal is to be like kind of jacked but kind of lean. So anyway, so that was the first study. The other study that supports going slower is a 2023 preprint by Eric Helms and colleagues.
What does preprint mean?
It means that it has not been peer reviewed yet. So there's like this whole process to it that I'm not totally familiar with because I just haven't, gone that route of like research and stuff like that. But yeah, anyway. So a 2023 preprint by Eric Helms and colleagues, which compared maintenance, a small calorie surplus, and a large calorie surplus. The small calorie surplus was supposed to be 1% body weight per month, and the large was 3% body weight per month. They found that higher rates of weight gain didn't significantly increase muscle hypertrophy, and because of that, they recommended a 5 to 20% calorie increase over maintenance, or about 1 to 2% body weight increase per month. Higher on that range if you're new to training, and lower if you're advanced. So yeah, if you're advanced, you probably don't need a massive calorie surplus because you're probably just not going to use it all. But if you're new to training, maybe just try it out to go like a little bit faster, because you don't know what you just don't know what you're capable of. Like I'm thinking of Nate, who has the craziest genetics of actually probably anybody I've ever seen in my entire life. That dude puts on muscle faster than anybody I've ever personally seen. And so I told him when I was coaching him, like, hey man, he wanted to do a bulk. I said, we can go faster. And he did. Like, he put on like, I think 2 inches on his arms in like 3 months, and he's trained. He's a very trained individual. His arms,
I mean,
you've seen the size of his arms. Yeah. It was unbelievable. Like I couldn't believe it. So anyways, just for a personal anecdote, I personally eat about a 50 to 100 calorie surplus per day. This equates to about 1% body weight per month, maybe a bit slower. Again, I use MacroFactor to do that. Use code Alex for a 2-week free trial. I'm sorry to plug him, but the creator of MacroFactor is my friend, Greg. I'm calling him my friend officially, Greg Knuckles. We play video games together, so I think it's apt to say that he's my friend. We text each other sometimes. Yeah. So like, I don't know. He's also like an actual idol of mine, so it's weird to call him a friend because like he's somebody I look up to so much. Anyways, he's the owner of Stronger by Science, for those who don't know, and then the creator of MacroFactor as well. And I'm also sponsored by them, obviously. Okay, so in terms of a calorie deficit, maintenance, or a bulk, what should the listener do? Well, ask yourself, what are your priorities? When you look in a mirror, are you happy with what you see? Do you feel like you could add 5 pounds of body fat and still be happy? If not, a deficit or maintenance would be the recommendation. Do you feel like you need to lose body fat and lean out? Okay, then deficit. And do you want to maximize muscle growth and don't mind if you accumulate some body fat in the process? Then do a surplus or a bulk. And remember, try to go slow with it. Mm-hmm. If you're like 14, 15, 16 years old, I don't think we have any 14, 15, 16-year-old listeners, but if you have a child who's like 14, 15, 16, and they are, I don't recommend calorie tracking for somebody that young.
Right.
But like if you're a parent of somebody that age, like I would just say like give them an extra glass of chocolate milk a day. Feed them a little bit more protein, which is what we're going to talk about next. Mm-hmm. Like at meals they're already having, maybe consider if there's somebody who's really having a tough time gaining weight, like I did when I was younger, adding some olive oil to your meals, some butter, some olive oil. That can be a really easy way to increase the calorie content. Maybe we should talk about bulking strategies on another podcast episode sometime.
That'd be a great one.
Yeah, that would be a good one. But yeah, trying to find easy ways, because at some point, whether you're in fat loss, whether you're in a surplus, at some point it's going to get a little bit harder. Mm-hmm. I know for people who have never done a bulk, it might sound so fun, like, oh, you just get to eat as much as you want. Like, one, no. Two, it starts to get very tough to eat that much food. Yeah. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Before we move on, we didn't really talk much on like maintenance during this section. So I'd just love to get your insight into like, if someone was really going more the route of like recomp, like they don't necessarily care super heavily about the number on the scale, but they want to grow a little bit more muscle. Maybe eventually they want to lose a little bit of body fat, but really they're just like looking at that sort of like body recomp. Wouldn't maintenance be like a pretty decent route of like, you don't really have to be in a huge cut in order to like reveal it, but you're still going to see decent muscle growth?
Yeah. There's going to be a certain point where, let's say somebody who's been, let's start from the beginning. Let's say somebody who hasn't been lifting for like 2 years. And I say like, I'm not saying you're going to Orange Theory for the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. I'm sorry. I don't care about Orange Theory. Like that is not hypertrophy based workouts.
Yeah.
So if you have not been lifting with a structured program, not just something you found on the internet, but somebody who actually knows what they're doing. If you haven't been lifting for like 2 years, you're still probably going to be able to make great gains at maintenance. Now, if you've been lifting for more than 2 years, 3 years, you've been doing it, your sleep has been dialed in, your protein, your calories have been dialed in, all these things have been dialed in, your workouts have been dialed in, you're actually training with a degree of intensity that scares fellow gym goers, then in that case, you might need a surplus to try to move yourself into that point. But like when people ask me this, my general recommendation, well, first I ask them, like, what's more important to you? Do you feel like you need to lean out a little bit? Or do you feel like you kind of want to push the muscle growth a little bit? And if they are not like, okay, well, I don't want to do a big deficit and I don't want to do a surplus. Okay, so now we're working on the range of either maintenance or a maybe 300 calorie deficit. And that is where that range comes in. It's like, do we have to get super into the minutia of you have to be tracking? If you're at maintenance, do you really have to track every day?
Right.
I don't think so. And if you're in a 300 calorie deficit, do you really have to track every day? I don't know. I think really if somebody's kind of in that middle of the road, maybe track for like 1 to 2 weeks, kind of get a good feeling of whatever calories maybe it's like 1800 to 2100, 2200. These are made up numbers. Please don't think that like, oh, Alex told me to eat 1800 for body recomp. That is not what I'm saying.
Also, to throw in there, like, if you have been slowly gaining weight, you should maybe track.
Yes,
like
definitely.
If you're not used to eating to maintenance, like, I don't want to say naturally, but intuitively, then like we're not saying just like don't track because you're in maintenance.
Right.
Do that if you kind of understand eating intuitively.
Yeah. And honestly, tracking is one of the greatest tools for that. It's just like you start to understand how many calories are in different foods, how much, protein is in different foods, fibers in different foods. And all right. So anyways, for that person, I would just recommend like a maintenance up to a minus 300 calorie deficit. A 200 to 300 calorie deficit is going to be very, very maintainable. It's going to be very easy to adhere to, honestly. I find that like 500 plus, it starts to get like quite
you
a bit
have
more
to
draining.
like
you have to be dialed in.
You have to think about that a little bit more. A 200 calorie deficit might be what some people eat in maintenance kind of naturally. Like you just some days you're less hungry.
Right. You just eat a little bit less some days.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
But we've also talked a little bit about like beginner lifters and, like what that kind of constitutes. But we also talk a lot about like intensity and RIR targets. Do you consider someone who says like, oh, I've been to the gym 3, 4, 5 years, but they've never really trained intensely? Is that still a beginner? Like, is that an advanced person?
Yeah, no.
I think that's good to clarify.
That is a good clarification. I would definitely consider that person a beginner because if you have not trained with intensity, you are leaving the number one. I very strongly hesitate. I don't like talking in black and white terms. So when I say something like number one most important variable, then people could be like, oh, wow, then Alex said I'll only do one hard set. It's like, you always have to look at all these variables, your sleep, your calories, your protein. And then in the exercise side of things, like your volume, and set volume. I'll talk about that later, but like set volume, your intensity, your exercise selection, all of these things, all these variables are very important. But in terms of the number one thing that I see the least when I'm in the gym, we were at Planet Fitness today, and it's not just today, but it's every single time I go, it's like people do 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 reps because they think these rep ranges are really what matters. It's not. Like, I held back from swearing because I don't want to turn this into an explicit episode.
PG.
Yeah. Lift harder.
Right.
Lift way harder than you think. Go to failure. And not just to the point where, oh, my legs burn or, oh, it got hard. Go until you cannot lift one more single rep with a gun at your head. Do that for every single set, for every single workout, for every single year for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Then you're advanced.
Right.
That is when you're advanced. I'm sorry I'm getting like real hyped up about that. But people just
very intense.
people just do not lift even remotely close to hard enough. And it really does get me frustrated.
Yeah. But I think that's a good clarification.
Like
you might still be a beginner if you've never trained with that in mind.
Yeah, going to the gym and doing like following, I'm sorry, but I see so many of these influencer workouts where they're doing like they bounce with every rep a little bit, and it's like pop. Yeah,
And there's nothing wrong with being a beginner again or like learning these things.
No.
Like there's nothing wrong with like, oh, I didn't know that. So now I'm kind of starting from square one. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't matter, but it is important to know like you're just going to see better results in the gym.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about intensity and RIR, which stands for
Yeah.
reps in reserve, but we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Okay, so now let's talk about protein. So, protein is quite literally the building block of muscle. Your muscle is made of amino acids, which I mean, among other things, but basically, it's the physical structure. You need protein. If you don't have protein, you're not going to build muscle. So, the most common recommendation for protein is 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. Crap. Can you multiply those by no, I know what they are on my head. I'm trying to do kilograms because I forget that people don't all use grams per pound.
Oh
They
yeah.
use grams per kilogram. So let me just do, okay. So those ranges are 1.3 to like 1.6 ish grams per pound, and sometimes, or per kilogram, sorry. So 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound, or 1.3 to 1.6 ish grams per kilogram. Sometimes people even round up to 1 gram per pound. Although honestly, I think that's just because it's easy to remember. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily need that high of protein, but there is some nuance to this. So let's turn to the studies. A 2018 meta-analysis by Morton and colleagues looked at 49 studies and found protein intake above 1.6 grams per kilogram did not increase resistance training induced muscle growth, and that is roughly 0.7 grams per pound. And I think that's a pretty good target, 0.7 grams per pound. I think that's a pretty good target for maintenance or a surplus. But if you're in a calorie deficit, I'd actually consider going higher if it's feasible. Now, for some people, it's their first time dialing in protein. They are not used to, maybe they weigh 150 pounds and they're just like, dog, you want me to get more than 150 grams protein, something like
Yeah.
that? I totally hear you. But protein will help with satiety, which is nice for fat loss, but kind of irrelevant for muscle growth. We're not talking about fat loss here. That was in episode 1. So, a 2014 systematic review wanted to find if higher protein diets could be recommended for lean and trained individuals. So, researchers looked at studies that had participants who were older than 18, had been lifting for at least 6 months, were in a calorie deficit, and had a body fat of below 23% for men and below 35% for women. That is a very selective criteria.
Yeah.
So they looked at every study that had that exact criteria, and they found, drumroll, 6 studies.
Yeah.
Without getting too into the weeds, the researchers recommend 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilogram for trained individuals who are in a calorie deficit. Higher or lower on that range, depending on size of restriction and degree of leanness. So higher on that range if you are very lean and in a big deficit, and lower on that range if you are maybe not that lean and you're not in too big of a deficit. And so those numbers, let me just find out the 3.1. All right, 1.4. So that is going to be about 1 to 1.4 grams per pound of body weight. Now, 1.4 grams per pound of body weight, that's going to be tough. That's going to be
a ton
that's a
of
yeesh.
protein.
That's a big yeesh
That's
from
a
me.
ton of
But
protein.
I'm thinking, because they did say size of deficit and degree of leanness really comes into play here. So I'm thinking like late stage bodybuilders should be doing that much. And I'm not saying that the average individual could benefit from that, potentially. Sure. But again, with all things here, we are talking about diminishing returns. However, this is optimizing muscle growth. So, I don't know. I think that much protein would just be,
it would just be hard to consume.
It'd be tough, especially trying to limit your fats and your carbs.
Right,
because,
like working around that.
Yeah, because if your calorie intake is already pretty low and you're trying to get in, and I do want to add in here that for protein needs are based on your lean mass. And now this isn't to say like use 0.7 grams per pound of lean mass. That's not what I'm saying here. Use it per body weight. However, if you are overweight, if you have excess body fat to lose, be kind of arbitrary about this. It's not this super black and white rule, but I would use your goal body weight. Let's say you're 200 pounds and you are not ripped. You have quite a bit of fat to lose. Don't feel like you need to be eating 140 grams of protein would actually be a pretty fine target. But if you're in a deficit, don't feel like you have to all of a sudden go up to like 1.4. What would that be? 280 200, yeah.
Something ridiculous.
1.4 times 200 would be 280 grams of protein. Please do not feel like you have to go that high in order to retain or gain muscle.
Right. I mean, if you, for some reason, love eating a really ultra high protein, for sure.
Yeah.
But you don't have to.
Yeah. For carbs and fats, don't overthink this. Go based on your preference and just don't eat very low carb or ketogenic if you want to maximize muscle growth. One study recommended greater than a carb intake of 5 grams per kilogram of body weight. I'm about 72 kilograms, so this would be about 360 grams of carbs. It sounds like a lot, but when I'm bulking, I'm usually between 350 and 400 grams anyways. Mm-hmm. If you're bulking and moderately active, this shouldn't be too difficult as long as you don't have a very high-fat diet.
Right.
So let's see, 5 grams. I didn't do all these. I'm just so used to talking in kilograms. Just a heads up, 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, like 10 grams per, no, 2.5, like 2.4 grams per pound is like roughly what that would be. Okay. Next, let's talk about volume versus intensity. And it's important to distinguish what I'm talking about on both ends of that. So for volume, we used to, by we, I just mean the exercise community, used to count volume as sets times reps times weight. So if you did, let's just use easy math, 1 set for 10 reps at 10 pounds. Mm-hmm. That would be 100. Right. That would be your volume. Let's say it was like lateral raises. That would be your volume for that day or that week of lateral raises. But it started to not be such a good metric because, let's do a leg press. Let's say I did 80 pounds for 5 reps. Very easy. Or 400 pounds once. I'm going to flex and stay still very easy for me. This guy can leg press 1,000 pounds.
Cannot relate.
Yeah. Despite my small stature, I can leg press with the best of them. Leg press is super inflated. I could never squat or deadlift 1,000 pounds. That'd be insane. Yeah. I'd be in the world record book. Anyway, so volume we count as number of hard sets. And so a hard set is just a set that's taken close to failure. And then intensity, when we talk about intensity in muscle growth science, we are talking about the proximity to failure. Mm-hmm. And there are 2 ways that we look at this. There is an RPE scale, which stands for rating of perceived exertion. And then there's an RIR scale, and that stands for reps in reserve. Now, these are inverse. So RPE 1 would be very, very easy. RPE 10 would be extremely difficult. You could not possibly do one more rep with gun to your head. It just wouldn't be physically possible. RIR is the exact opposite. It means how many reps do you have left in the tank? And this is what I personally use. I find it's a little bit easier than like having to do the inverse. Okay, at RPE 7, I have 3 reps left. Okay, RIR just feels a little bit more user friendly to me.
I agree.
And so in this, it's flipped in the sense of RIR 0 would be like RPE 10. RIR 0 is I had 0 reps in reserve. Right. There was nothing left.
Or taken to failure.
Yeah, all the way to failure. And then 2 RIR would be like I had 2 reps in reserve. I probably could have gotten about 2. And this isn't like an exact thing. If you're new to RIR, don't feel like you're like, oh, is it 2 or 3? Maybe it was a 2.5. Like, it's not that serious.
Yeah. And that's also a skill that comes with
develop.
time.
And as you do not only like just more of it, but on a specific exercise, you can start to really tell like, did I? And honestly, when in doubt, just send it. That's my recommendation. When
unsafe exercises for sure.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, unsafe exercises. So something that wouldn't be safe is like a bench press without a spotter or safety arms. Yeah. Barbell bench press specifically, I should say.
I actually think we have later in the
I think we do too. Yeah.
So
we'll save it for later. Okay, so volume versus intensity. A 2023 preprint study, you now know what that means.
Amazing.
Led by the data-driven strength guys, Zach Robinson and Josh Pelland, found exponentially greater gains as one approaches failure. And this was, I told you about this study. Mm-hmm. When I saw the preprint of this study, it was like Christmas Day for me.
Right.
I was so excited. I said, this shakes up everything. For a while, it was, science thought that muscle growth at 0 RIR or 2 to 3 RIR was relatively similar, but 0 RIR came with the drawback of more fatigue.
Right.
And so it was like, oh, you probably shouldn't do that. You should leave the bulk of your training like 1, 2, 3 RIR. Always leave like 1 in the tank. And I didn't do that back then. I was not doing that because I didn't want to leave like, maybe was I 3 reps in reserve or 2 reps in reserve?
Right.
So I would just send it every single time. Well, it turns out I was ahead of the curve.
Yeah. You were onto something.
Yeah. So yeah, they found, oh no, I already said that. So yeah, they found an exponentially greater gains as one approaches failure. So this was pretty eye-opening. Now it does need to be said that there is a fatigue cost to going to failure, especially if you've never done it before. Now I'm so used to taking every set to failure that it doesn't really disrupt my muscles too bad unless it's like a brand new exercise or something I haven't done in a long time, like the adductors, machine adductors. My inner thighs were screaming. So the first time I did that, I knew that it would be bad. And so I left like a legitimate 3 reps in reserve and it still was pretty brutal.
Right.
And like I think it was like the 3rd session that I did it. I finally took it to failure, and it was bad, but it was like not nearly as bad as it would have been if I did to failure day 1.
Yeah, there are definitely some exercises that like feel worse taken to failure.
Yeah, they just mess you up.
Yeah, and that might be different for different people.
Sure.
Like some people are just more sensitive to others. Like chest press for me,
I was gonna say your chest.
Miserable. Yeah. So I'm a little bit more conservative. I still take it pretty close to failure, but I'm not going to push it all the way.
What's funny is my chest, exact opposite.
Yeah, that's funny.
I have no issue. I could do, and I wouldn't do this, but I could do 15 sets taken to failure, and I don't even know if I'd notice it the next day.
Yeah, no.
It's crazy.
I would be in tears.
For me, Romanian deadlifts, those mess me up.
Yeah,
Yeah, and lunges. Oh, lunges mess me up bad. Okay, so there is an inverse relationship between volume and intensity. As intensity goes up, volume can go down while seeing similar gains, and vice versa. So if you're like, no, I don't want to go to 0 RIR, I'd rather leave like 2, 3 in the tank or more, because you can still see gains at 5, 6, 7 RIR. It's just you'll have to do a lot more sets in order to do that. And then vice versa, if you are like, nope, I'm locked in, I got my lifting playlist, I got my headphones on, death metal, Eminem, whatever it is, wherever you live. It's Eminem for us because, we're in Michigan.
Of course.
So that's us. So in that case, you can bring volume down a little bit.
Yeah.
I've seen people that are jacked that I look up to that are very intelligent people in the field. They're doing like 6 sets total for an entire leg workout. And they will do 1 set of like a hack squat, 1 set of, a leg curl, a leg extension. And that's it. 1 set for each exercise. And I mean, dude, if you saw training videos of theirs, it's like I send it to failure. My face is red and purple, but they have people like helping them like kind of take off load and stuff like that. And so they're doing intensity techniques like, things like drop sets and, stuff like that too.
Sorry not to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
This relationship can also like, depending on how much time you have to work out, like you can really
smart. You should be taking
navigate this.
Yes, you should be taking advantage of this.
Right. Like I don't work out that frequently, and when I do, I want to be in and out in like an hour or less.
Yeah.
But because I don't work out super frequently, I know that there's a lot that I need to hit in a full body, workout. So I'm gonna do 2 sets, and I'm taking them to failure. Maybe on certain exercises, 1 RIR. But I mean, like. I'm like
you send it.
I'm like borderline throwing up.
You're very good. You're very good at sending it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. You've followed my lead on that.
Maybe too closely.
Maybe a little too closely. Yeah. If you're unfamiliar with RIR, obviously there's the explanation we already had, but I would recommend starting to use it, even if it's not something that you necessarily track. Just think like, did I have 0, 1, 2, 3 reps in reserve? Because you should be trying to get to like 0 to 2 in my recommendation.
And one exercise that we did, or like one example we gave or walk through, I don't know, it might be in like your group training thing somewhere. We kind of gave the guideline of like, if you have no idea how to track RIR and you have no idea like what weights to use or anything like that, do like a weight that is going to be a little too light
Mhm.
and take that all the way to failure
Do as
until
many
you
reps as
know
you
that you
can.
can't, again,
Yeah.
on like a pretty safe
Yeah.
exercise.
It's like a bicep curl.
Yeah.
With good form.
Yeah.
You know, don't start like swinging into it. As soon as form breaks down,
Yeah.
that's it.
And you can use that as a pretty good guide to kind of determine like, okay, this is what taking something to failure
Is what
actually
it
means.
feels like.
And like physically, you like cannot do
You'll
another set.
try to curl it up, and it's
Yes.
like you might get it a little bit of the way, and then it's
Yes.
just not going anymore despite your hardest intentions. So that's what failure is. So we talked about volume a little bit, and the question out there is there an upper limit to volume? For a long time, and I'm going to say even up to maybe 2-3 years ago, it was thought that volume was a bell curve where, you know, at the far left end, we wouldn't see too much gains, and then we get up there maybe in the neighborhood of about 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week is the number that a lot of people thought was right about there. And then maybe around 30, does it go down like a bell curve does, or does it kind of just like taper off? So a 2023 study had participants, they started at much lower than this, and then they progressed them week to week, adding, I think it was either 0, 4, or 6 sets. I don't have the study pulled up in front of me, but I think it was either 0, 4, or 6 sets. At the end, at the end of the study, participants were doing 52 sets of quads per week.
I'd
Not
be
just
screaming.
No. I'm not saying like 52 sets like total.
Right.
52 sets of quads specifically. And this was varied between, I think it was leg press, leg extension. I know it was leg extension, and it may have been hack squat as well, but regardless, 52 sets of quads per week, and they saw greater muscle growth than the lower volume groups.
Yeah.
So this is to say there might not be an upper limit to volume. Now, big asterisk, there are diminishing returns, you know? So like the first 10 sets, you're going to get, I'm just going to throw a random number out there for, you know, whatever, maybe 80% of the gains. The next 10 sets, you might be getting up to 90% of the gains. You add 32 more sets on top of that. You're probably adding another 9% or something like that. You know what I mean? So like, it's definitely all about, when it comes to lifting and volume and stuff like that, just consider the diminishing returns and consider your own sanity.
And also, in addition to that, like consider the recovery and whether or not like, oh, if I'm too sore because I did too many sets, I'm going to skip the gym the next day. Like that's not beneficial either.
That's harming your overall growth. Yeah.
So like you also have to consider what's realistic to recover from in order to make your next gym session. But
that said, if you can recover from it, you can probably grow from it.
Yeah.
I saw this quote. I've seen it thrown around a few times. I don't know who it's originally by, but I loved it. They said that it's not that you aren't recovering well enough. It's that you are not eating and sleep. It was something like that. But anyways, it was basically saying like, you can recover from anything provided you eat enough calories and protein and you sleep enough. And I thought that was a pretty interesting way to look at it. And sleep is extremely important. That's actually our next topic that we're going to be getting into in just a minute. But let's finish out the volume and intensity first. So yeah, diminishing returns. So just because you could lift, 6 days per week doesn't mean you should. You have to consider the long-term sustainability. Now, if you're like a college student and you're like, dude, this is my life.
Yeah.
I go to classes, I lift, I don't really like going out and drinking and, things like that, provided you're over 21, then dude, go nuts.
Right.
Do your thing. Yeah. Absolutely. But if you're like, hey, I'm a new parent, do I have to lift 6 times a week?
Right.
No, man. Just live your life. If you're still interested in muscle growth and stuff like that, you can get a lot done 2-3 days a week, 15, 20 minutes each. You're golden. And again, we will talk about that. We have a future episode planned for what's the least you can do for gains. Now, frequency. Frequency is the number of days that you train per week. And how does that kind of interplay with volume? So a 2016 study by Brad Schoenfeld and colleagues found that training a muscle group 2 times per week led to greater muscle growth than 1 times, even when muscle growth was equated. And they weren't really sure if 3 times a week is greater than 2, but in my opinion, that's dependent on volume. And so the way this works is I would recommend not doing more than, pretty often, a common recommendation is 8 sets per muscle group per week. I actually would dial that back to 5 or 6 sets per muscle group, not per week. I'm sorry, not per week, but per session. Yeah, very important distinction. I would recommend not doing more than, I'm going to say, a black and white number. We're not considering the intensity and all that, but I wouldn't be training a single muscle group with greater than 6-ish sets per session. If you were, let's say you wanted to like hit 10 sets of bicep per week, don't do that on one day.
Right.
Split that into 2 or 3 days and your muscle growth will be significantly better. And side note, it's probably a good idea to hit priority muscle groups at least twice per week. If you're somebody who's like, oh, I want my glutes and my shoulders, or, your arms or your chest or whatever to get quite a bit bigger, then if you are following like the typical like bro split where you hit like certain muscle groups have their specific day, like a shoulder day, a back day, a glute day, then in that case, I would just say like, maybe look into different splits where like an upper lower for 4 times per week, a full body 3 times per week, an upper lower PPL if you're doing 5 times per week. There's a lot of ways. There's no best split or anything like that. It's just a way to organize your training. So you could have like biceps, hamstrings, and middle delts. Like that'd be the weirdest split ever, but like you could do that. It doesn't mean anything. There's no best split. Just a way to organize your training. Okay. How are we doing so far? Are we doing pretty good?
Like personally, I'm doing great.
All right, cool. All right. Next, let's talk about sleep. So besides lifting weights, sleep is one of the greatest tools to maximize muscle growth. It cannot be understated. If we were able to put sleep into a serum or a pill, that would be the most profitable serum or pill on planet Earth. And it is not even remotely close. Not only are the physical benefits of like, the cool stuff like muscle growth, but it's also neurologically, sleep is really good for us. Generally, you should be increasing your sleep. If feasible.
Yeah. And obviously like, it's not always feasible. But generally, for sure.
And if you can't increase your sleep quantity, the amount of sleep you get, try to increase your quality. We recently got an 8 sleep for this exact reason. Now, the 8 sleep is very expensive.
Yes.
It's very expensive.
Yeah.
But it is a heating and cooling pad, like dual zone. So Maddie can sleep a little bit warmer. I prefer sleeping a little bit cooler. This isn't sponsored or anything. I wish they sponsored us because it'd been great to not have to pay full price for that thing, but I have a unboxing and review video that should be coming out relatively soon. I don't know. I want to get like a few days into it still.
Yeah. Maybe we can do that around the time we do a sleep podcast.
Yeah. That'd actually be a great idea. Yeah. We definitely need to do a dedicated sleep podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
But for now, in terms of like body composition, muscle growth, a 2010 study by Nedelcheva and colleagues took 10 adults and put them on a calorie deficit and had them sleep either 5.5 or 8.5 hours per night. They did this for 2 weeks, and then 3 months later, they did the opposite of what they started with. So half the group was in one section, the other group was in the other section, and then 3-month washout kind of period, and then flip. They found that sleep reduction reduced weight loss as body fat by 55% and increased the loss of fat-free mass, sort of colloquially known as muscle, by 60%. Now, why we call it fat-free mass is because in your body you have fat mass and then you have fat-free mass. And so fat-free mass is not just muscle. It could also be glycogen. It could be water. But we do just kind of say fat-free mass because it's way easier to measure. I don't know if you would be able to get exact amounts of lean muscle without dissection. And unfortunately, I don't think too many study participants are signing up for that one.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be tough to clear that with an ethics board.
Yeah. I think I would draw the line
at dissection.
Dissected in the name of science.
Although, they do take muscle biopsies where they do like cut out a piece of your muscle.
Yeah. I think I personally would draw the line there too.
Studies consistently show increased sleep leads to improvements in muscle growth, fat loss, physical performance, energy, stress management, etc. So, I don't want to get super into the weeds on sleep. Just know that if you can increase your sleep, whether it's quantity or quality, you're going to be in good shape. Do you have anything you want to say about how to increase sleep quality, or do you want to save it all entirely for the...
I feel like we can save it, but just like you said, practically, do what you can.
Turn off your phone, you know, put your phone in potentially a different room if you're somebody who scrolls at night. We use separate comforters so that we have our own blankets. That's a big
Yes.
one. Blackout shades.
Yeah.
So there's no light coming in.
I think a big recommendation is get your room as dark as possible, cool it down.
Yep. Cave as much as a cave like as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, this next part I was so excited for that I wouldn't even let Maddie see my notes on it because it was one of the most interesting and at points funniest studies I've ever looked at. I took extensive notes on this one.
Yeah, so while he's pulling that up, we have a shared document where we like write down notes. Again, Alex writes down notes, I read them. And he was laughing while going through this one. And he was like, I don't even want to put it in here. I'm going to surprise you with this. So I actually have nothing in here about what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, I'm like, I was telling her, I'm so excited for this. And really a lot of it is going to be like relatively boring.
Sure.
But there's one section that is so good that I'm just, okay, let's get into it. So we got the question, how does stress affect muscle growth? And I thought that was a brilliant question because it's talked about, but like actually what do we have in terms of data? You know, I think there's the easy stuff like, okay, well, if you're more stressed, maybe you're less likely to go to the gym. Maybe you're less likely to, you know, choose health promoting behaviors.
Sure.
Maybe you're not locked in on your diet as much. Maybe you're not giving as much energy toward your exercise. There are all those kind of like, I'm going to say like soft sciencey kind of things that could be going on. But let's put some data here. Okay. Humans are part physical and part mental. No getting around that. That is intertwined. Panic attacks are mental, but they certainly have physical ramifications. I think you've seen me have how many? Just like maybe 2?
You've definitely seen me have a couple of panic attacks. So.
Yeah. So we're fine, by the way.
Yeah.
Mental health is totally fine.
Right. Yeah. That wasn't supposed to be anything more than like.
This was not a cry for help. Just a funny little.
Sometimes that happens.
Yeah. Not something. Yeah.
Right. Like
sometimes it happens. It happens. Whatever. Okay. A study from 2014 by Matthew A. Stoltz-Kalamainen and colleagues looked at how stress impacts muscle growth. Now, in research, ethics, unfortunately, dictates a lot of what can or cannot be studied. So rather than inflicting a ton of mental stress on participants, which again might be unethical, they found college students who were already undergoing a lot of stress. This is kind of an easy ethics workaround. It's the same thing with pregnant people. You can't tell pregnant people like you know, group A, you're going to go partake in behaviors that we think could be dangerous.
Right.
It is more they will seek out individuals who may be doing what people deem as dangerous. And actually there have been recently some observational studies because people have been said like, you know, it was long time false knowledge that women shouldn't lift. And so they found women who were like, no, I'm going to lift through my pregnancy anyway, and then studied them compared to the women who weren't lifting. And they found all kinds of benefits. I recently made a post on this. But anyway, so the researchers sent 2 surveys, and they looked at students' perceived and actual stress. And this helped create a matrix between the people who had low or high actual stress versus the people who were handling it very well or very poorly. And so the actual stress form, called the undergraduate stress questionnaire, this is good. This is it. This is what I was cackling about. It is 82 yes or no questions. And technically it's like you just check them off. So it's not yes or no. You just check them off if you've experienced this. So 82 check or no check questions with things like had a lot of tests, fought with boyfriend or girlfriend, death in the family, checkbook didn't balance, bad haircut today, somebody cut in front of me in line, haven't had sex in a while, ran out of toner while printing. I mean, this is a study. And you know what's crazy is this undergraduate stress questionnaire is like widely used.
It's so funny. Can you imagine being an undergrad and being asked if your printer ran out of toner?
Dude, if I haven't had sex in a while, and that's so embarrassing to admit to like researchers. Like if I'm a teacher's assistant, you know, doing like my graduate program and I'm reading this, I'm like, Yeah, those two, they haven't had sex in a while, but they are dating, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, you'd learn a lot about your students.
Yeah, too funny. Okay, so researchers took the extremes from both groups. The people who had high stress and were not handling it well went in the high stress group. They were clearly very stressed. And the people who had low stress and were handling it very well, they went in the low stress group. Then they put them through a hell of a workout. I forgot. This is the other funny part. This should not have cleared ethics, in my opinion. This is borderline not as bad as 52 sets of
That's
quads.
brutal.
That was brutal. But okay, they put them through a hell of a workout. Leg press with rounds of 10 reps, and they increased anytime you were able to get 10 reps. So they would put on, let's say, 180 pounds. You do 10 reps. They're like, good, you got 10, increase the weight. Okay, increased weight. You got 10, good, increase the weight. And they kept doing that over and over and over and over and over again until you failed to get 10. All right, now we found your 10 rep max. That was phase 1 of the workout. Now, phase 2 had 6 sets and started with the recently discovered 10 rep max. Most people got 8 to 12 reps on their first set. That was expected. The second set was 90% of the 10 rep max weight. So if you were doing 400 pounds, for example, it'd be 360 pounds.
Okay.
It's still a lot of weight.
Yeah, especially if you've done all this other stuff.
Yeah. So if they got 10 plus reps on that second set, okay, that's the weight they stayed at for subsequent sets. If they got less than 10, they moved down to 80%. So that would be 320 pounds on the 400-pound example. And then, they would do that at 80%. Either way, they did 6 extremely hard sets of leg press, and the study mentioned, quote, participants were given strong verbal encouragement to complete the protocol. Now, I've never been in a lab when they do these exercise science studies, but from what I hear, that is the greatest testing ground for pushing yourself to your absolute limits, because it's just a bunch of graduate students, teachers assistants, masters and PhD candidates that are just screaming at you, trying to get the absolute most out of you. So saying that is strong verbal encouragement, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So after the leg press test, they looked at max isometric force using a leg press that was locked in place. Do you know what an isometric test is?
No.
So it is where an isometric is where you are holding something in position. So if I were doing like a bicep curl example, it would be like I held it out at 90 degrees and just kind of held it there. That would be an isometric. And so with a leg press, they basically locked the carriage into place and then use what's the name of it? It's like a dynamometer, Anyways, it looks at how much force you're pressing into the plate, but the plate isn't actually moving. So they tested their max isometric force. Both groups went up down by about 50%. This is expected. Then after 60 minutes, they tested again, more recovery, but similar between groups. They tested again at 24, 48, 72, and 96 hours. So 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and 4 days later. At the 24 and 48-hour testing marks, we started to see significant differences in recovery. The high stress group was about 80 to 89% recovered, judging by their max isometric force, at both the 24 and 48-hour mark. Meanwhile, the low stress group was 93 and 100% recovered by the 24 and 48-hour mark. It took the high stress group 96 hours, 4 days, to recover to 100%, double the time of the low stress group. So, what are the takeaways here? Mental and emotional stress have a very real impact on gains. If you're going through a turbulent time, consider reducing frequency of workouts and give yourself more time to recover. And if your stressors aren't going away anytime soon, kids, work, life, try to increase recovery practices, find things you enjoy, and regularly work them in. That was such a fascinating study.
Yeah.
It doesn't look at, it's so interesting, like the angle they took with it. They didn't look at like the maybe like mechanistic reasons. They looked at how do you recover?
Right.
And how, because if you're not recovering as well, you go train 2 days later, you're 88%, 89% recovered versus 100% recovered. That workout is going to be totally different.
Right. And, a 10 or 11% difference in recovery seems minor, but that can be
significant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was just so interesting. And I loved the undergraduate stress questionnaire.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. I mean, it had 82 questions, and those were just some of them, going from like
Yeah.
kind of tame to like toner ran out of seriously. And it's just a check or no check. And so toner ran out of ink while printing. In this case, was on the same level as death in the family.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it. I mean, yeah, just
Complete side note, but I don't know if you lived on campus at one point. I lived on a college campus, and having to like get out of your dorm and go to the community printers and print something off, and then
Yeah.
heaven forbid a printer was out.
oh,
If you're already
miserable.
stressed, I could see how that really wouldn't
Yeah.
make your day better.
Yeah. There were some other funny ones, like had to talk to a teacher.
Oh.
You know?
Oh, that would be high for me.
All right, next let's talk about exercise selection. So what makes a great hypertrophy or muscle growth exercise? So I'm going to be pretty quick on this part. Higher stability. So, if you're doing a leg press versus a Bosu ball back squat,
Yeah.
the leg press will be significantly better because you're more stable. You're able to put more into the exercise. But this also goes, I mean, that's a very drastic example. Please
Sure.
don't do Bosu ball back squats. And if you have a personal trainer that's asking you to do them, fire that trainer. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He or she doesn't know what they're talking about. But like even stability in terms of, okay, how about a cable curl, a cable bicep curl versus a cable bicep curl where my upper arm is pinned against the cable machine? That extra bit of stability or anchors goes a very long way. Ben Yanes is somebody, if you're curious about anchors and learning about them a bit more, Ben Yanes is a really, really good follow for that. The next, component of what makes a great hypertrophy exercise is safety when taking it close to failure. You were mentioning this earlier.
Yeah.
So something like a barbell back squat, taking that to failure, low key, it gets a little scary once you put on like 400 pounds on the bar. I mean, even at 100 or 200 pounds, it's all
Sure.
relative.
Yeah,
But like
all relative.
you have to either, if you don't have safety bars where you can kind of like just squat down, you have to bail from it. And
Yeah.
that's that's something you can learn to do, and it's totally fine. But same with like a barbell bench press. If you don't have safety arms or a spotter and you get pinned under that, it's very uncomfortable. It's happened to me, and it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Very painful.
Definitely.
So yeah, safety when taking close to failure. Cables and machines are phenomenal for this reason because they all have like stoppers or a cable. You just put it down,
Even some like dumbbell exercises.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to put down dumbbells versus
the only one that I haven't been liking lately for dumbbell bench press, because for me, I just have to use so much weight. I use like 90s or 100s, and it's a little sketchy getting it into and out of position. And if I get to that bottom position, I can't press up. Like just dropping them down to the side feels like I'm going to cause a ruckus. And
what's a funny one for me? Skull crushers.
Yeah.
A dumbbell, I will never do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just do a katana.
Yeah.
Extension.
There's just different exercises that I think are.
Any time we have, I didn't actually write this on here, but resistance profile. That actually makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So, for example, a resistance profile, if you're watching on video, I'm going to do a little demonstration here. If you're not, I'll try to do my best to explain it. Let's say we're doing a dumbbell bicep curl, which is an arcing movement. We have the elbow, which is the fulcrum. And then if you're familiar with physics, at the very bottom, your moment arm is very short. What that means is the distance between the fulcrum point and then the end position, I forgot what it's called, the end of the lever is very short. Now, if we bring it up to 90 degrees, we now have a very long moment arm. The distance between the fulcrum and the, again, end of the lever is very long. This means that it is much more difficult. And at the top, again, same thing, very, very short moment arm. Okay, so what this means is that at the very bottom and at the very top, there's not that much resistance. And at the middle or the mid-range, there's a ton of resistance. Comparatively, if we were to do that with a cable, it's a pretty even resistance profile. And because cables aren't working against gravity in the same way, we can kind of manipulate gravity a bit. We can really drastically change where we are putting on the most resistance. And that brings me to the point of working muscles in their longer muscle position. So what that means is when your muscle's at its most stretched. So your bicep just down by your arm, down by your side, stretched out, your bicep is now stretched. If you bring like your fist toward your shoulder, now the tricep is stretched. And then if you bring, because the tricep attaches below the shoulder, if you bring your elbow Keep your hand near your shoulder and then point your elbow toward the sky, almost like you're trying to draw a sword off of your back. At that point, your tricep is very, very stretched, not just because it's already stretched because of, where your hand is, but also because it is attached below the shoulder. Man, if people aren't watching on, if you aren't watching, you're like, what the heck is he talking about? But anyway, longer muscle position, that is more beneficial for muscle growth. Another thing is, and then, just with cables, you can line up things that where the max resistance or peak resistance is where your muscle's in that stretch position. So one of my favorite examples for this is a wrist height cable lateral raise. That's I don't like saying like best or worst exercise, but that's the best middle delta exercise out there, in my opinion. Partial reps are actually, most people would think like, oh, always do full range of motion. Partial reps are actually likely better than full range of motion in a lot of cases. Milo Wolf is a leading researcher on this topic. So if you're curious, go check out his work, Dr. Milo Wolf. Very, very interesting stuff. He has a lot of videos on it, a lot of research on it. Go check that out. And then enjoyment matters too. If you like an exercise, you'll probably just push harder with it. So while we can worry about all this like super optimal stuff, at the end of the day, you just have to like the exercises you pick. Yeah. And if you don't, just swap them out. Does cardio interfere with gains? No. Moving on. I'm kidding. Well, now, I mean, not really though.
Yeah.
Just don't do cardio to exhaustion immediately before lifting. Greg Nuckols, my best friend, has a phenomenal science-heavy article on this topic. The title is "Cardio Isn't Going to Kill Your Gains. Need More Evidence? You Got It." And that's on the Stronger by Science website if you're curious. How long should you stick with the same exercises program? As long as you're making progress and you're not bored. The A-Team and Forward Forever get a new program every 6 weeks. I personally change my own programming every 8 to 14. Honestly, often longer. I'll stick with the same stuff for 6 months or more.
I have been doing the same handful of exercises. I'm not kidding, years.
Yeah.
And I'm still making progress. If I wasn't making progress, I'd switch some stuff up.
Yeah.
But like, I do the same things, the same movements.
And when I do change stuff up, it's just swapping out a few exercises. It's not like I'm rebuilding the entire thing.
Right.
Definitely don't be a program hopper. Somebody who changes up their workout, does a new workout every week or every day. Don't do that. Short version, neurological adaptations. You get better at an exercise the more times you do it. And when you get better at it, your body's going to be recruiting more muscle fibers. And so that's like part one of adaptations is your body doesn't want to use resources. Your body just wants, okay, hey, this guy's doing bicep curls. We need to get better at bicep curls. Let's start recruiting a little more muscle fibers. Let's kind of learn the movement. Then once those neurological adaptations are tapped out, it's like, dude, this guy's not going to stop. Okay, I guess we got to spend some resources so we're more prepared for this next time. So the neurological adaptations are important. And then reduced delayed onset muscle soreness. There's something called the repeated bout effect, which is basically the first time you do an exercise, you're going to get wrecked from it. Subsequent times, you're not going to get so wrecked from it. So if your delayed onset muscle soreness is reduced, you'll be able to recover faster and you'll be able to work out sooner.
Yeah. You'll also just be able to see your progress better.
So important. Yeah. Tracking progression and making sure that you're
right.
It's also like, okay, I got 15 reps. You're 15 pounds for 10 reps. It's like, okay, let's try for 11 today.
Yeah.
Sometimes just having those kind of relatively, like, I say arbitrary, but like those objective markers is kind of really, it can be motivating to push past for that. And getting PRs is always nice.
Yeah.
Rest time. So there are some conflicting studies on this. Old Bro Science said that lift for 60 to 90 seconds was like the optimal rest time. And their reasoning for that was, I think it was something to do with growth hormone. But anyway, the most popular study is by, I say popular, air quote popular. Brad Schoenfeld is like the guy. I've already referenced him like 3 or 4 times. He's like the guy in hypertrophy science. So the most popular study is by Brad Schoenfeld. He compared 1 minute versus 3 minute rest times and found that 3 minutes was superior for hypertrophy and strength. So practical recommendations, 2 to 3 minutes, 90 seconds at least. More, if you have time for it, might be marginally better. Again, diminishing returns. Most people don't have a ton of time for it.
Right.
And you kind of also have to consider, like, is it worth spending 3 minutes to rest versus 2 minutes if that means my volume goes down? I would say no. And if you're short on time, supersetting antagonist muscles is a good play. Antagonist muscles would be like biceps and triceps, chest and back. quads and hamstrings. Or you could do things that are not even remotely related, like
Right.
hamstring curls and lateral raises, for example. Like just don't do, if you want optimal gains, don't do a superset that's like leg press and then leg extensions, because you're hitting quads twice.
Yeah.
And like leg press will also hit like your glutes and potentially a little bit of adductor, but you get my point. This always comes up, best rep range, 5 to 30 rep range, but realistically 5 to 15-ish. Brad Schoenfeld, again, study looked at 5 to 30 reps, all equally good for hypertrophy, as long as proximity to failure is the same. But dude, 20 reps, 30 reps, it's just like, that just takes so much time. It's like, how hard could you really be pushing yourself at 30 reps, like a 30 rep max going to failure? It's just, and so I like working within like 5 to 15. And if I'm being really honest, it's like I do like 6 to 12. If I start getting lower than 6, I reduce the weight. If I start getting more than 12, I increase the weight. So simple. I just take every set very close to failure, and that's my training protocol.
Yeah, but if you're in a position where like you're using dumbbells and you don't have enough weight to necessarily push it, you know, you can still feel confident within that 30 rep range.
That's a very good point. Yeah. If you're limited on dumbbells, feel free to increase the rep range, or you could just like increase, you know, change the difficulty of the exercise by adding in some partials. You could, there are a lot of ways depending on the exercise to make it a bit harder. Supplements. So creatine, we'll do a full podcast episode on creatine, but maybe I should do like a real short thing on it. Creatine has been consistently shown. I have a really long post on it, I think from back in like February 2023 or something. But yeah, creatine has been consistently shown to be safe and increase power, strength, hypertrophy, all that. Basically, it works by ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is like the energy currency of our body. That's like the base level. And when we, so ATP, adenosine triphosphate, so there are 3 phosphate groups that attach to an adenosine. And when one of those phosphate groups breaks off, that releases energy. Then it becomes adenosine diphosphate. So there are 2 phosphate groups attached to one adenosine. In order to resynthesize this, there's something in our body called phosphocreatine. That phosphocreatine donates its phosphate group over to the ADP, the adenosine diphosphate, and then it becomes usable ATP, adenosine triphosphate again. And if you're like, whoa, phosphocreatine, that sounds familiar, creatine. Yes, that is exactly why creatine is very beneficial. It increases your phosphocreatine storages, helps you, it allows you to push the ATP PC system, energy system lasts for like 10 seconds. And with creatine supplementation, we can increase that marginally, and then we also increase the rate of resynthesization. It's also, you know, really beneficial. More and more studies are looking at very beneficial for the brain, especially against protection against Alzheimer's. So I just think, and if you're worried like, oh, is creatine a steroid? No, we already get creatine from our diet, and our body synthesizes it on its own. So
I'm always so surprised at how many people think creatine is a steroid.
It's weird.
Well, it's so easily accessible.
That
like,
too. That
like
too.
You
could go to Walmart and get it.
Buy it anywhere.
Anywhere.
Everyone is selling creatine.
Yes.
It is. I just found out how hard it is to get steroids.
Yeah.
Creatine is widely available.
Creatine you could get from anywhere. Amazon, Walmart, anywhere you want. Yep. Yeah, we'll do a podcast episode on creatine at some point, but just for now, that would be a supplement, like the one supplement that I would say like this is worth it. Protein, if you're like, wait, what about protein powder? Does that count? Protein powder is just powdered milk or powdered whatever, you know, if it's pea protein, that's different. But like, let's just say whey protein, it's just powdered milk. So milk has casein protein and whey protein inside of it. So they are just taking the whey portion of that. Now there is casein protein available too, but whey protein is the most common. They take the whey protein, they turn it into a powder, they add delicious flavoring, and it's just very convenient. That's it. So I don't really consider this like, yes, it is supplemental to our protein intake, but is it like a supplement in the like, I don't know. I struggle to call it a supplement. You
also don't need protein powder. No. If you hit your protein targets just fine in your diet, I'm not going to say that that's like better or anything like that, but like you don't have to have protein. I rarely drink protein shakes.
I do. So. I've just been doing like the Fairlife protein shakes, the chocolate. I miss the salted caramel so much.
The strawberry is so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish they would come back with their
If
better.
any workers from Fairlife are listening to us, please, dear God, bring those back as soon as possible. I'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
I'll become a sponsor. And then the other supplement that comes to mind is beta-alanine. It increases the amount you can do before you get fatigued. Its primary function is to increase the concentration of carnosine in muscles. Now, carnosine acts as a buffer for the hydrogen ions, which is acid, produced during high-intensity exercise. The buffering capacity of carnosine helps to delay the onset of muscle fatigue and failure. So if you're somebody who like really taps out from that burning sensation, especially during something like leg extensions, getting some beta-alanine in you might be a little bit beneficial. A lot of pre-workouts have beta-alanine. Oh, you know what I didn't say is caffeine. Caffeine, that's obviously one that's going to really improve your performance and therefore your gains. However, if it is after, caffeine has a half-life of 4 to 6 hours, and that is dependent on, there's this one gene that I'm not remembering because it's like something like, MLH-A1. That's not it, but like
something like
it's
that.
something like that. So it's like, it'd be hard for me to memorize. But anyways, there's some gene that it doesn't matter. Most caffeine has a half-life for most people let me restart. Caffeine for most people has a half-life of 4 to 6 hours. And so if you drank 200 or 300 or 400, let's say 300 milligrams of caffeine at 5 p.m., like you're like, oh, it's after work, I'm going to go to the gym, 5 p.m., let's slam some pre-workout, 300 milligrams of caffeine. 6 hours later, it's 11 p.m. and you still have 150 milligrams of caffeine in your bloodstream.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah.
And whether you're like, oh no, this doesn't affect me, I have no issue falling asleep. It's not just the falling asleep, it is the sleep quality that could be drastically reduced. And then the next day you might be like, wow, I don't know why I feel so tired. I'm going to drink some caffeine. I need some coffee to like kind of wake me up. And it's this like negative feedback loop that I just recommend. Drink your caffeine as early in the day as possible.
Yeah.
Definitely try to cut it off by noon at the latest would be my recommendation. Okay, let's get into some questions. So we're just going to try to rapid fire these because we're going on. I knew this would be our longest episode. Now we're only 3 episodes in, but I knew this would be the longest one. But even still, let's try to be conscious of people's time. Okay, gaintaining. Eating at roughly maintenance and lifting could be a great strategy. Oh, this was just a question. Gaintaining ? Which is eating at roughly maintenance and lifting. Yeah, could be a good strategy if you're going slower, like in terms of both muscle growth and fat loss.
Yeah.
Sure.
And also I think a lot of people just like kind of live in that maintenance phase.
If you're not tracking your food and you're not like skyrocketing weight or, dropping weight fast.
If you're not super concerned about getting super lean
just lift some weights, eat some protein, and you're good. You don't got to be all dialed in. So yeah, all good. How many sets per muscle group is enough? Commonly quoted 10 sets per muscle group is a good number to start at. Now, the way we count sets per muscle group changes person to person. Like, okay, a compound movement, like a bench press, for example.
Right.
How do you count chest versus triceps versus anterior delt? A lot of people will just count all of those as one. So a bench press, you do 3 sets of bench press. All right, you just did 3 sets of chest, 3 sets of triceps, 3 sets of anterior delts. How many sets per muscle group is enough is really dependent on the intensity that you're going at. So if you're closer to 0 RIR, dude, you might be able to gain muscle. And if you're newer, like how advanced you are, what your sleep, what your nutrition looks like. But like, let's just say like, dude, 1 set per muscle group per week could be enough if you're kind of new to training and you're absolutely sending it. And if you're kind of, sandbagging it. That's the phrase I was looking for. If you're sandbagging your workouts, then like you're going to have to do a lot more sets. But how many sets per muscle group is enough? Let me say like 5 to 10 would be a good starting point. See if you're making gains over time per week. And then if not, maybe increase it or look at your intensity. But we will be doing a very thorough, deep look into these more specific numbers in the What's the Least You Can Do for Gains episode. It'll be coming out in a few weeks. What rep range is best for fat loss? There is no rep range that is best for fat loss. When we're talking about fat loss, always doing like 6 to 10 reps versus 8 to 12 reps, there will be no, like technically are you moving your arm or leg like 3 or 4 more times for a couple more sets? Yes, but that is such a negligible difference. You could go walk for 30 seconds.
Right. At that point, there's like better uses of that time.
Always rely on nutrition for fat loss and go listen to episode 1 for tips on that. Does meal timing matter? is there an anabolic window? So it used to be thought that there was like this bro science kind of thing, was like anabolic window. You need to have a protein shake within 30, 60, 90 minutes. There are all these different, numbers thrown around. That's turning out to be less and less true. I will say it's probably a good idea to get some kind of protein in plus or minus 2 hour window of your workout, just so that your body has some protein or like, amino acids to utilize for the synthesis of muscle protein. But meal timing, not a huge deal. Yeah, not a huge deal. I will say I'm kind of leaning toward maybe more important as you age to stop the muscle protein breakdown that's going on as you sleep and have some kind of protein bolus early in the morning. That's something that I personally do. I drink a protein shake with my coffee every single morning. Most mornings, I'll say. Just try to get some protein in early in the morning is what I personally do. But
Is there a target of protein we should be hitting in the morning?
no, not really. Jorn Tromlin did some research on this, both on he's a phenomenal protein researcher. That's Jorn Tromlin, Jorn. But anyway, no, and the reason I say no, I would have said like a few weeks ago, I would have said 30 to 40 grams, 20 to 40 grams per meal is a really good thing, because then you're spiking your leucine and then letting it drop off, and then split that out by 3 to 4 hours between meals. But then there was a recent study that looked at, even if you have up to like 100 grams of protein, I think it was, in a single meal, your body will still utilize all of that. It's just that it'll take longer to digest and process. So no, honestly, meal timing, it's one of those probably like 1% things that seems to be less important as time goes on and more research comes. Free weights versus cables versus machines. All those are good. I personally like cables and machines just for the added stability component a lot of times, but it also depends on the machine.
It also depends on the exercise.
Yeah, it depends on the exercise. Some machines are horrible and some machines are phenomenal. It kind of depends on the manufacturer and the specific machine. An example of a horrible machine would be something that maybe limits your range of motion, maybe feels a little bit uncomfortable on the joints. A non-converging machine chest press where the arms don't like converge, that won't fully shorten your pecs. So if you're pushing straight, we always have to look at the upper arm movement. And so when we're looking at our chest, because that's what the chest does, is it pulls the upper arm toward the midline. And so if the arms of the machine are not converging, then you don't get to fully shorten the pec, which, I mean, again, based on new research on length and position, fully shortening the pec, probably not that important. But yeah. Is there any difference between lean or big muscles? Nope. All muscle is just muscle, and it either does one of two things. It either shrinks or it grows. And that's it. And so if somebody's thinking about like lean or big muscles, somebody who has big muscles, that's just a big dude. That's just like, or woman, like they just have big muscles. And if somebody has more like lean muscles, it's probably what you're seeing is just they're a leaner individual.
Right.
And so, but there's no lengthening your muscle. There's no, I say lengthening, like you're not going to change the insertion and origin points of your muscle just by like changing your training or anything like that. So no, muscle either grows or shrinks. Ideal number of exercises per workout, I would say 4 to 6 is a pretty good spot. Can you grow muscle at maintenance even if you are very lean and do not want to lose body fat? Or do you need to be in a surplus? Yeah, depending on, okay, I'm going to say a hot take. People could probably always gain muscle at maintenance, even if they're advanced. It's just that it could go so mind-numbingly slow that it's basically impossible to see the changes on maybe even like a 3, 6, 12-month basis. Now, me personally, I don't think either one of us can see muscle growth on me after 3 months. I think every 6 months you can maybe see it, but I'm at that point where it's just like it's taken a long time.
Yeah.
Year to year, I think there's significant changes.
Yeah. It's also to the point where like sometimes, we take your measurements and we're like, oh yeah, you have like, we can see those differences, but like visually it gets a little harder to just like eyeball it.
Yeah. And that's actually a good point to like, check out different body composition measures, or not body composition, but just like different metrics, don't just look at your body weight, look at progress photos, look at measurements. I do measurements of my neck, my shoulders, my chest, my arms at the widest point, my forearms at the widest point, my waist, my hips, my thighs, both left and right at the widest point, my calves at the widest point. I think that's everything.
I think so. Yeah.
Somebody's going to be rewinding that and being like, wait, hold on, go slower. So yeah, I think you can grow muscle at maintenance even if you're very lean. But like very lean, what does that mean? Like if you're very lean, like bodybuilder lean, nah, dude, it's
Yeah.
very unlikely that you need to put some body fat on. If you're like sub 10% for men or sub like 18% for women, it's going to be an uphill battle to do that. Dropping 5 days strength training to four. Any noticeable negative difference? It depends. I'm assuming in this case that like your volume is going down because
Mhm.
it's not like, if they were doing 10 sets per day and they're not raising it to like 12.5 sets per day or something like
Sure.
that. Let's just say like volume is going down, then yeah, there will be a negative difference. But again, there's diminishing returns. So
Mhm.
like going from 1 day of lifting to two, you're going to get significantly greater gains.
Yeah.
2 to 3, significantly greater gains. 3 to 4, yeah, you'll get greater gains, but it's not going to be like insane. 4 to 5, honestly, maybe not that big of a deal. And
Mhm.
honestly, you also have to think about like if you drop from 5 to 4, but then you come with more energy to those four,
Right.
you might get better gains. So it's something
Yeah.
that like I encourage, don't just look at this from like a numerical perspective. Kind of think about like how am I feeling about this?
Yeah. Probably also just have to look at your split and like
Yeah.
make sure you're hitting the.
Yeah. 4 days, I like doing an upper lower personally. It's so tried and true. It's just like you're hitting your upper and lower muscle groups twice per week.
Mhm.
Obviously, that's not the only way to do it, but that's what I enjoy. Best way to grow muscle as a woman who doesn't want to do a surplus. Do everything that we said in this podcast and just, yeah, don't eat in a surplus. That's fine. Best foods to eat. Although maybe we changed her opinion of a surplus because she's like, oh, I didn't realize I could go so slow. I
Yeah.
could do that.
Yeah.
Best foods to eat, best vitamins, best supplements. So best foods to eat, whatever you enjoy, as long
Yeah.
as you are getting about 0.7, 0.8 grams of protein, maybe a little bit more in a deficit. Best vitamins. Very tough for me to make any recommendations without, knowing
Yeah.
what your dietary composition looks like, what your blood work looks like.
Right. I was going to
Um,
suggest like if you're really concerned about vitamins, you should probably get some blood work done.
Yeah, like a multivitamin is usually not a bad idea. It could do absolutely nothing or it could do something, but I kind of
Yeah.
think of it as like a vitamin health insurance policy.
If you're in the winter and you're in like a northern state or just northern hemisphere, maybe you want a vitamin D.
This is not, check your vitamin D serum level before you supplement with vitamin D, but you're probably not getting enough sunlight in the northern hemisphere. And then best supplements, yeah, creatine and caffeine. Is it easier to grow or regrow muscle due to atrophy? So much easier to regrow muscle. It'll come back very, very quickly. And atrophy just means muscle loss. What is the biggest non-lifting / non-nutrition hurdle you see with clients? I'm going to say consistency because I think I really drill into them. Intensity matters a lot. But I think too often, not to get too sappy, but too often people don't give themselves enough compassion. They are very hard on themselves. And I know we all expect a lot from ourselves, and that's totally cool. But with lifting and with all this stuff, it's like, it's very hard to regress. If you have spent, let's say you spent 2 months lifting weights, you have that muscle forever within reason. And it's very, very easy to maintain muscle. And even if it goes away, similar to the last question about like, it is easier to regrow it due to atrophy. So, like, even if it goes away a little bit, the second you get back to lifting, it's going to start coming back so, so, so quickly. So, yeah, I guess the biggest non lifting, non nutrition hurdle I see with clients is I don't work with one on one clients anymore. That might change. I might be working on something. We'll see. This is not a promise, but we'll see. Might be working on something pretty cool. But yeah, I would say compassion is a big one. Would you coach somebody differently if they were using HRT? That's hormone replacement therapy. I've never done it. Or if, I think I did actually. It was a woman who was taking testosterone actually. And I didn't coach her any differently actually. I think if somebody felt, I think this would be the same thing no matter if they're on HRT or not. We look at how they are responding to training, if they can handle more, if they want to handle more, and then we make adjustments from there. How to keep full range of motion while also bulking. So bulking doesn't necessarily change your range of motion unless you are getting like Giga Chad sumo wrestler big, in which case that's like a whole different thing. But yeah, bulking, if you're taking your exercises like and you're putting a good stretch on the muscle, you'll actually probably increase your range of motion in a lot of cases. Does it take longer to build or lose muscle? Build, not close. Yeah, way longer to build. Because losing muscle, starve yourself. Don't sleep. What's the worst thing you could do? Drink alcohol, a lot of it, copious amounts of alcohol. These are things that I'm not recommending you do. I'm saying
This is
if
what
you
you would
wanted
have to do.
what you would have to do to lose a lot of muscle, stop eating protein or eat I mean, you would die if you stopped eating protein eventually, but eat very minimal protein, drink a lot, probably smoke cigs, don't sleep, be really stressed,
Yeah.
don't lift weights, don't even move, actually.
Yeah.
Put yourself in a full body cast. Those are the things that come to mind.
I think this all goes back to like,
Oh,
you need so much
massive
less.
calorie deficit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You need to do so much less to like maintain.
Yes. Maintaining is so simple.
Yeah.
Sometimes the number that's thrown around is 1/7 or 1/9 of the volume that you needed to build it is what you need to maintain it. So that might be like a 20-minute workout once a week or once every other week, full body workout.
Yeah.
Do men and women see muscle growth at different rates? Why or why not? They see different. Men and women see muscle growth at same relative rates, but different absolute rates. So men typically start off with a higher muscle mass. And so because of that, so when like, let's say a man gains like 1.6 pounds of muscle per month, that would be a lot. 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 For a beginner, that could actually be relatively realistic.
Yeah.
For me, it's not happening at this point. But a woman might see, you know, a little bit less, but relatively actually see similar rates, which is very interesting. Muscle growth versus strength versus power. The difference is important. So muscle growth is increasing the size of your muscle. Strength is how much weight you can do or how strong you are, how much weight you can lift. And then power is how fast you can move a certain amount of weight. So are the differences important? Honestly, if you're looking for aesthetics, focus on muscle growth or hypertrophy stuff. If you're looking for powerlifting performance, then you need to focus on strength, and you should be training with lower reps just because strength is specific, the law of specificity. And then if for power, this could be important for like Usain Bolt, for example, like he needs to worry about maximum power. So
Yeah,
the difference is important. Yeah, but it's just specific on what your goals are.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Quote, I'm afraid I might get manly, big, and bulky, end quote. Is this a trigger for you? No, not a trigger for me. I just think I often compare it like, are you, when you get in your minivan, are you afraid you're going to turn into Dale Earnhardt Jr., become a NASCAR driver? Like, no, it's not happening. Going from not touching weight, people who ask this have
I thought I did. I started getting itchy.
People who are worried about this have never, maybe they're seeing somebody who's just like a woman who is either been dedicated her entire life to getting unbelievably jacked, or they're seeing somebody who is on steroids, or both. And it's just not realistic for the average person to get manly, big, and bulky from lifting weights.
I think that like if you take a look at a lot of the women fitness influencers or fitness coaches, a lot of them are, you're not going to look at them and think, oh my God, they are so bulky. But like these people have really dedicated themselves to the fitness space. Yeah. And like,
again, some of them though, a lot of the big influencers legitimately are on steroids.
Yes.
A lot of them.
That is true.
It is way more common.
Yes.
And people always said to me, it's way more common than you'd think. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure. No, it's way more common than you'd think.
Yeah.
And even people who don't look like they are on steroids might be on steroids. Now, this isn't diminishing people who are not on steroids and just have great genetics or incredible work ethic, or if they've been doing it for decades. But yeah. 2 more questions. Perfect world, no restrictions. What is the best way to grow muscle? Hop on Liver King's steroid cycle where he was spending $11,000 per month. One more time. $11,000 per month he was spending on steroids. And I do want to remind all of you that Liver King was telling people that he was not taking steroids, and rather it was his own supplement line that was getting him. So this is so unfortunately common in the industry, is people will lie, or they will tell you about a problem, and then they have their own supplement line to sell it. There are so many charlatans. I've been meaning to do more debunk videos to try to call out some of these accounts, and these, not just like big influencers, massive millions, if not tens of millions of followers, and they are lying to people. And it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah.
All right, last question. I've been trying to explain how a surplus/bulk phase might help my husband. Please help with this. I love this. So, does your husband want to do a surplus, or a bulk? Like,
Right.
that's
It
kind of
is a
important.
commitment. Like you have to be in
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah. I mean, you have to, I would recommend he tracks his calories for a while so he doesn't way overshoot the surplus.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I would recommend Macrofactor to most people.
Yeah.
If they can't afford a coach, if they can afford a good coach,
Mm-hmm.
then great. I know of one who might be opening back up on the market again, just soft launching. We're not sure here. We're not sure. We're weighing out the options, but I've been writing a whole lot about it. But anyways, so yeah, surplus or bulk will help. It puts your body in a more anabolic state.
I also think it's important of like, this is just a question we have, so it's a little vague. We don't know,
sure.
but like, what are you hoping to get out of a surplus or a bulk phase? Like, if you're encouraging your husband to do that, what's the
because he's going to put on
goal?
more body fat. So like
Sure.
if he's somebody who's never lifted weights before, maybe he has, maybe he hasn't, the first thing I'd say is like, should he get on a structured training program? That would be my first recommendation. And then like, yeah, calorie surplus will help. We covered a calorie surplus earlier in the episode though, so I'm sure she got her answer from that. But yeah, if you're listening, husband, just feel free to DM me if you have any questions about a bulk. If you have things that we didn't cover, feel free. I'm happy to brainstorm with you. Okay. This has been a doozy of a podcast. I knew it would be our longest one, but I'm really, really happy with everything we covered. I know I'm going to be referencing this one quite a bit from here on out because we just covered so much.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm proud of how much we covered and the work that I put in on all this information because this was a lot.
You did great on the prep work for this one.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a good one.
All right. If you are interested in supporting us monetarily, the A-Team is my group training program. Again, $27 per month, so less than $1 per day. New cycle is every 6 weeks. And at the time of this podcast dropping, if you're listening to it when it just went live, we are in intro week. This is the week of January 14th, 2024. It would be January 16th by the time this comes out. But you can follow me at AlexTeamyFitness.
And you can follow me at Meals with Maddie.
And the next episode will be our Q&A episode. That will be released on the 23rd. And then after that, some of the episodes we have planned are metabolic adaptation, sleep 101, creatine 101, top 5 and worst 5 supplements, what's the least you can do for gains, and much more. So if you're new here and you were sent this to a friend, tell them I said thank you for sending it over, and we hope you stick around.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, guys.